Thanks to signing a certain someone in the 2019 offseason, the Orix Buffaloes suddenly became a much more well-known team in North America. And another thing became apparent. Wow, they suck! When someone is new to a league, they often look at a bad team and the natural question becomes, was it always this way? Well, no. Despite only making the playoffs twice in this millennia, the Buffaloes have made the Japan Series 12 times and won it 4 times, most recently in 1996 with a certain Ichiro Suzuki. But wait, hold on. That jersey Ichiro is wearing, that doesn't say Buffaloes, that says BlueWave. If they're the Buffaloes, who are these guys? Ah, them. See, the current Buffaloes are actually the product of a merger between 2 teams. One, the Orix BlueWave, previously known as the Hankyu Braves. The other was the Kintetsu Buffaloes. One got to keep their history, culture, club records, and the other, well, they got their name and their stadium stolen and their history effectively erased. This whole merger shook NPB to its core and honestly deserves its own video, and don't worry, it's on the list. But there's one thing I wanted to cover. See, the Buffaloes haven't made 12 Japan series, they've actually made 16 of them. And their most recent one wasn't in 1996 with Ichi at the helm, it was 2001. That team was a spunky group of misfits that took the league by storm, fronted by some of the top hitting talent in NPB, and it's a story that, thanks to the merger, is often lost on fans that didn't experience it or don't speak Japanese. And that's where I come in. Strap yourselves in, this one's going to be a bit wild. But before we get into that, let's take a quick look at the team history. The Kintetsu Buffaloes, or Pearls as they were originally known, were founded in 1949, but didn't turn pro until NPB was organized in 1950, and well, they sucked. They went 44, 72, and 4, finishing last in Pacific League. It didn't help matters that their crosstown rivals, the Nankai Hawks, had finished second and went on to make the Japan Series the next year, while the Pearls only got worse. They finished dead last in Pacific League for the first 4 years of their existence, finally finishing over 500 in 1954, but still nowhere near the Hawks and Lions, who had established themselves as the dominant forces in Pacific League. Oh, how little things change. They'd fall back under 500 the next season, and narrowly avoided contraction as NPB dropped from 14 teams to 12. They followed it up with the worst season ever by winning percentage in NPB history. 29 wins, 97 losses, 4 ties. 49.5 games back of the Lions. 230 winning percentage. Only the TAIYO Whales of 1955 come close. 31 and 99, 238 winning percentage. It was clear things had to change. And things did. First, the name. Out with the Pearls, in with the Buffaloes. Next, the philosophy. Seeing how well Chico Barbone was doing, one prefecture over with the Hankyu Braves, the Buffaloes elected to go out and get some foreigners of their own. These were two-way player John Bottler and pitcher Glenn Mickens. It didn't really work. While Mickens did serve as ace of the staff, the team was still utterly terrible, losing 103 games in 1961, the first and only NPB team to have a 100-loss season. They'd sneak back above 500, albeit barely, in 1963, but would get beaten back down to the basement the next year. It wouldn't be until 1969 that the Buffaloes were anywhere near competitive, thanks to the Lions and Hawks tumble through the standings. And oh boy, look who's there to stop them from making the Japan Series, the Hankyu Braves. The Buffaloes of the early 70s were a powerhouse pitching team. They just couldn't score, and it cost them. Despite regularly finishing in the top half, as the Lions took over their former role as the perennial PL punching bag, the Braves, Hawks, and Orions were always better. And it wasn't long until normal service resumed, and the Buffaloes were back at the bottom of the league. But in 1975, something incredible happened. The Buffaloes won Pacific League, and they won it by 8 games. Oh boy, rev up your engines, we're ready to go. Hiroshima, here we come to kick your... Wait, what? They have to play a playoff series? Against the Braves. But they beat them by 8 games. Come on, what do you mean? I guess it's time we explain Pacific League's playoff system of the 70s. The first half champion played the second half champion in a best of 5 to determine who would make the Japan Series. It was part of an attempt by Pacific League to make their product more exciting, as Central League, who had 2 teams owned by large media conglomerates, were absolutely killing them in terms of revenue and ratings. So they had to do something to keep fans invested. But instead of a system that makes sense, like the modern playoff system where the top 3 play a 2-round playoff with the first place team getting a bye, they decided to have the first half champion play the second half champion. Not only is that A, more complicated than it needs to be, it B, can have a side effect of screwing over consistent teams. Hello, 1984 Soul Bears. You have my pity. As you may be able to guess, the Braves beat the Buffaloes in 4 games and reached the Japan Series, where they beat the Carp to win their first ever title. One has to wonder if that series went the other way, and the Buffaloes came out on top, would their history have been preserved as well? One can only speculate. Something changed in 1979 though. The Buffaloes were finally able to hit. Charlie Manuel fled the authoritarian clutches of Tatsuo Hirooka and signed with the Buffaloes for 1979. And they proceeded to put up an OPS of over 1,100 while cranking 37 bombs in just 97 games. They'd battle the Braves all the way, winning the first half, and then stomping them in the playoffs to get revenge for 1975. But they'd go on to lose to the Carp in 7 games. They'd win the second half in 1980 and demolish the Orions in the playoffs before once again falling to the Carp in 7 games. Again? Throughout the 80s, the Buffaloes would play second fiddle to the new dominant force of Pacific League, the Cebu Lions. Despite the efforts of Vic Harris, Dick Davis, and Ralph Bryant, 3 of the most underrated foreign players of all time, they'd come agonizingly close to the pennant in 1988, finishing with a winning percentage just barely below the Lions. However, there was no playoffs to save them this time, and it was all for naught. They made the Japan Series again in 1989, only to fall to Warren Cromartie, Tatsunori Hara, and the Yomiuri Giants in 7 games. So, having come so close to a title 3 times in a decade, it was time for everything to fall apart. Despite having Hideo frickin' Nomo alongside Bryant for the first half of the 90s, the Lions and Blue Wave still stood in their way. Hey, at least they signed Jose Canseco's underachieving brother Ozzy. Wait, you mean he got injured and never played a game for them? Oh shit. Then, in 1994, Nomo bolted for the Dodgers, Bryant fell off and left, and everything seemed hopeless. They were back at the bottom of the standings, the party was over, and they had nothing to show for it. Thanks to those damn Lions. The Buffaloes signed 2 new foreign players for 1996, first baseman Chris Donalds and outfielder Tuffy Rhodes. 22-year-old third baseman Norihiro Nakamura would also have a breakout season, and the Buffaloes would pull themselves out of the basement. The late 90s Buffaloes were basically the antithesis of the early 70s teams. Screw pitching. We don't need it if we can outscore everyone. They'd still finish below 500, but their offense looked like it could be fantastic for the future. Sure, the Blue Wave won the title, but soon the Buffaloes would be able to... the Blue Wave took Chris Donalds off them. Well, you know what? They don't need him. They've got Rhodes and Phil Clark. They've actually got starting pitching with an ERA under 4. They're over 500 again, right behind the Lions and Blue Wave. Come on! In 1998, the Buffaloes got victimized by an extremely close Pacific League pennant race, the likes of which had never really been seen before, and I may cover it in another video if I have the time. Despite only being 5 games back of the Cebu Lions, they were a game below 500 and 5th Pacific League. That's how close it was that year. It seemed like it would be an exciting season for 99. No. Despite Tuffy Rhodes cranking 40 home runs and Nakamura putting up 32 more on top of that, they'd finished dead last in the league, 23.5 games back of the Fukuoka Hawks, who had adopted the philosophy of, hey, Seibu won a lot in the 80s and early 90s, let's go get some of them. They'd be equally hopeless in 2000, although they were only 15 games back of the Hawks this time. Baby steps, people, baby steps. Those years did allow for good things, though. It allowed them to pick up a certain pitcher named Hisashi Iwakuma. Going into the 2001 season, most people had two teams picked out as contenders for the Pacific League pennant, and neither were the Buffaloes. The first was the Fukuoka Daiei Hawks. Having won the pennant the previous 2 years, the Sadaharu Oho-managed Hawks had won their third title 2 years previously, thanks to the young talent on their roster, coupled with a couple of poached Lions. While Kudo had gone to the Giants, Koji Akiyama was still around and playing well, providing a veteran presence on a team that was still getting used to this whole winning thing. Their core was in their prime. Nobuhiko Matsunaga, Hiroki Kokubo, Noriyoshi Omichi, Tadahito Iguchi, and Kenji Jojima were all entering their prime. With Mel Nieves gone, Pedro Valdez looked set to be a good long-term replacement. Pitching would be their weak spot, as only one of their starters had managed an ERA under 4 the previous season, but they'd won the pennant anyway, so a minor improvement would go a long way. The other team was an old foe of the 80s looking for a resurgence, the Seibu Lions. The Lions had finished second by a slim margin the previous season, mainly due to their 5 ties putting the pennant just out of reach. Kaz Matsui had led their offense, along with Yusuke Kawada and Tony frickin' Fernandez, but the rest of the team had largely underperformed offensively, and Fernandez was gone at the end of the year, replaced by a Diamondbacks prospect named Alex Cabrera and a Rays prospect named Scott McLean. Their real strength had been pitching. After putting up a 3.97 ERA in 167 2/3 innings as a 19-year-old, Daisuke Matsuzaka was looking to be the ace of the future, although he'd have to limit the walks. Fumiya Nishiguchi and Ming Chie-su backed him up in the rotation, along with a bullpen fronted by Shinji Mori and Kiyoshi Toyota. Things were looking up for the Lions. The Buffaloes, meanwhile, had a decent offseason, bringing in some foreign help in pitching with Jeremy Powell and Sean Bergman, and some defensive help from utility infielder Sean Gilbert. Other than that, their team was virtually the same. Rhodes, Nakamura, and Kenshi Kawaguchi led the offense, and while Katamekawa and the rest of the pitching staff could be generously described as hot garbage, they hoped that the foreign help could mitigate that, at least a little bit. New manager Masataka Nashida had one goal in mind: finish above 500. With the Marines and Fighters in a tailspin, and the Blue Wave losing Ichiro to the Mariners, third place wasn't exactly a pipe dream, and it would be a good starting point to build for the future. No one but the Buffaloes Owendan had them pegged to win Pacific League, which made it all the more shocking when the Buffaloes came out of the gate hot. By the end of April, the Buffaloes were 16-11-1, half a game up on the second place Hawks. The Lions may have been in 5th place, but they were only 3 games back of the league lead. The only team that was well and truly out of it was the Fighters, already 7 games back of the pack. The Buffaloes did it thanks in large part to a 6-game unbeaten streak, as well as absolutely beating up on the Fighters, who they had yet to lose to. While they did give up 5 or more runs 10 times and failed to shut out any of their opponents, they'd already scored over 150 runs, thanks in large part to Tuffy's 9 home runs on the season. 6 of their 16 wins were by more than 5 runs. Long story short, despite giving up 4.86 runs per game, they still had a plus 15 differential. But that isn't to say that it wouldn't come back to bite them. May would see the Blue Wave try and prove they could do it without Ichiro, as they went 13-7-2 on the month and crawled their way back into first place. Daiei remained in second, 1 game back, while the Marines went on a 7-game win streak to drag themselves up into third place, right alongside the Buffaloes, who went 12-13-1 that month. Seibu was still languishing around 500, but they were only 3.5 games out. As for Nippon Ham, well, less said about that the better. In June, Kintetsu would go on an absolute tear, going 14-8, including 2 absolute demolitions of the Daiei Hawks. 15-8 on June 15th and 18-9 on June 22nd. That latter contest saw Tuffy and Nakamura hit their 28th and 24th home runs respectively, as by now it was pretty clear who the offense ran through. By the end of the month, Tuffy had 31 dingers to his name. The Hawks, for their part, would go on a 7-game winning streak, only for it to be supplemented by a 6-game losing streak. The Blue Wave stayed hot too, even after the Hawks and Buffaloes charged past them in the standings. The Lions and Marines hung around 500, and the Fighters stayed 14 games back of the party. But hey, at least they didn't get worse. By the All-Star break, the Hawks were inching closer to the Buffaloes, now only 1.5 games back. It was the Lions' turn to go on a tear as they went 10-4 and leapfrogged the Blue Wave for 3rd place. 5 Buffaloes would be selected for the Pacific League All-Star team alongside 6 Lions and 8 Hawks. The Buffaloes would finally hit their first major roadblock in August. They would lose 8 of 9 in the middle of the month. They'd turn around and win 8 of the next 9, but that didn't help them in the standings, especially with the Hawks and Lions going on winning streaks to end the month. While the Blue Wave went on a 7-game skid that caused them to fall away from the top pack. The Fighters also got a mini 6-game winning streak. Good for them. To the end of the month, the Hawks didn't pull the half-game lead over the Buffaloes, and it would only get worse from there. To start September, the Buffaloes went on a 5-game skid, getting swept by the Lions and losing 2 out of 3 to the Hawks. 2 teams that they could not afford to lose to. They took the 3rd game against the Hawks thanks to Nakamura and Rhodes' homers, bringing their season totals up to 41 and 53 respectively. Rhodes was now 1 home run away from tying Randy Bass for the most home runs by a foreign player, and 2 away from tying Sadaharu O for the NPB record. With 16 games left, it definitely looked like it was in reach. The Buffaloes, knowing they had to do something sooner than later, turned around and thumped the Marines the next 3-game set. Then, a wrench of a different kind would be thrown in the works. And overnight, everything changed.
We want to tell you what we know as we know it. We just got a report in that there's been some sort of explosion at the World Trade Center in New York City.
The effect the September 11th attacks had on the baseball world was profound. Many American players in NPB were unsure of what to do. Some of them just wanted to go home, and some did. But Gilbert, Bergman, and Powell knew they couldn't just leave in the middle of a pennant race, and they'd look to Rhodes, the only long-tendered foreign Buffalo, for support during this time. They'd all elect to play on, with USA written on the front left panel of their caps. They got hammered by the Blue Wave before turning around and winning 6 straight, 4 of them by 1 run or less. Odd for a team with such terrible pitching. Facing Matsuzaka on September 24th, Tuffy would finally hit home run number 55, tying the NPB record. Then in the 9th, Nakamura hit his 45th of the season to send the Lions packing. Going into September 26th, they were now 3.5 games up on the Lions, and 4 games up on the Hawks. With 5 games left for all 3 teams, all they had to do was win 1 game, and they would clinch the Pacific League pennant. If they lost, they'd still have to deal with the winner of the Lions-Hawks game that day. The Hawks answered that question by destroying the Lions 9-0, clearly intent on fighting the Buffaloes to the end. And the team they had to face? Why, the Orix BlueWave, of course. Could it be anyone else? In 3 years' time, Orix would take this team and erase everything but their name. But for now, all they were trying to do was erase their pennant hopes. With the teams facing off 3 times in the last 5 games, and the Blue Wave leading the season series 12-11-2, it looked like a genuine possibility.
This is most disturbing.
The Buffaloes would jump out to a quick start thanks to a Nakamura RBI groundout, and Bergman would hold the Blue Wave scoreless through 3. Then it hit the fan in the 4th, thanks to an error from Yuji Yoshioka that scored 2 runs, putting the Blue Wave on top. Then a single from Ryota Aikawa, coupled with yet another Yoshioka error, scored the 3rd run. One inning later, Bergman would be lifted after giving up a 2-out single and hitting a batter, and in stepped Ikuro Katsugari, the same man whose liner had resulted in the Yoshioka error 1 inning prior. He'd rope a base hit into left, scoring the runner from third, before Hisashi Aikyo got them out of the inning. Aikyo held down the Blue Wave for the next 2 innings before being lifted for Akira Okimoto, after a Kenshi Kawaguchi solo shot brought the Buffaloes within 2. Then, the backbreaker. Ryota Aikawa clubbed this solo shot in the top of the 9th off Okamoto. With a 3-run lead in the bottom of the 9th, it looked like a sure thing now, especially with the Blue Wave closer Masanobu Okubo on the mound. Yuji Yoshioka led off the bottom of the 9th. Eager to make up for his 2 errors in the game thus far, he slapped a single to right. Kawaguchi then cranked a double down the line to put runners on second and third. Gilbert was up next, but seeing how he'd been mainly a defensive option throughout the season, and he was 0 for 3 on the night, Daisuke Masuda, who was hitting .340 on the year, primarily as a pinch hitter, was brought in to hit for him, and he ended up drawing a walk. Next up was backup catcher Kenji Furukubo, who was hitting a measly .140 on the year and had already struck out twice tonight. So he was lifted for another of the Buffaloes' pinch hitters, Hirotoshi Kitagawa. Kitagawa had been a bench bat for half a decade with the Hanshin Tigers, who drafted him out of Nihon University, and he'd never really had the chance to make his mark, despite how terrible the late 90s Tigers were. He'd signed 1 prefecture over with the Buffaloes in 2001, and despite still primarily being a bench bat, he flourished. Up to this point in the season, he was batting .266 with an OPS just a hair under 800. Not bad considering his career best OPS was .523 in 28 games, half a decade ago. Having the season of his life, he was looking to prove that he finally belonged in NPB, and now he was the winning run in a game that could clinch the Pacific League pennant. A single would be enough to keep the line moving, but Kitagawa had other plans. I hate to do this 2 videos in a row, but welcome to a moment in history. And there you have it. Pacific League's lovable losers just clinched their 4th Japan Series berth. They'd be taking on the Tokyo Yakult Swallows in the Japan Series, a chance to prove how good they really were. Oh, come on!
Nori sits in the front bench and I sit in the back, kind of separate from each other because we don't want the team to think it's just about me and him. It's about all of us. So I sit in the back next to the pitcher. Usually the pitcher sits there and Nori sits in the front, kind of separate from each other, let everybody know that we're all in this together. And it's not just about me or Nori. It's about this whole team.